The 1960s, the golden age of raw bravery, when bikes were little more than high-speed coffins with skinny tires. Racers like Giacomo Agostini and Mike Hailwood weren't just winning, they were unbeatable. Agostini in particular won 122 GP races and 15 world titles. But here's the part most people forget. His MV Agusta had access to tech and development budgets other teams couldn't dream of. He had a dedicated factory team while privateers were buying parts out of catalogs. Eventually, complaints got loud, very loud. So MotoGP responded with a bold move. They capped cylinder counts. They imposed displacement restrictions. In 1969, new technical rules were introduced to level the playing field, not because Agostini was breaking rules, but because he was too efficient at winning within them. Sound familiar? Now fast forward to the late 1970s. Enter Kenny Roberts, a flat-track cowboy from California who didn't give a damn about European tradition. He came in sideways, literally bringing rear-wheel steering from dirt tracks into the world of asphalt racing. He revolutionized cornering. Riders before him leaned the bike. Roberts? He slid it through corners like he was still in a dirt oval. He leaned off the bike, hung out like a pendulum, and carved new physics into every lap. MotoGP was stunned. Roberts won 3 consecutive titles from 1978 to 1980, and suddenly, other riders couldn't even keep up, let alone compete. The reaction? FIM introduced restrictions on ground clearance, adjusted tire compound regulations, and pushed for unified riding positions. Why? Because Roberts turned his style into a cheat code, and once again, the sport had to close the door behind him. By the 1980s, the world had seen enough of brilliant chaos, and yet chaos had a new face. Freddie Spencer. Fast Freddie was a freak of nature. In 1985, he did something no one had done before. Won both the 250cc and 500cc world championships in the same year. 2 classes, 2 bikes, same guy, same season. He exploited a loophole where scheduling allowed crossover entries, and he dominated both fields. The FIM quietly revised scheduling policies and restricted cross-class participation in Premier Series. Why? Because Spencer proved that with the right talent and stamina, one man could win every trophy on the shelf. Now we step into the 1990s. Mick Doohan, a man so dominant, he turned MotoGP into a one-man demolition crew. From 1994 to 1998, Doohan won 5 straight titles. But it wasn't just that he won while carrying a machine no one else could tame. The Honda NSR 500 was brutal. Most riders crashed it, some were injured by it. Doohan, he mastered it. His telemetry, throttle control, and ability to adapt to unrideable machinery made people believe he had alien reflexes. Honda gave him custom handlebars, a thumb brake after a crash, and allowed near unlimited R&D around his riding style. Other teams protested. This is a one-man team. This isn't fair. MotoGP reacted by limiting factory testing time, capping resource deployment, and eventually introducing spec electronics in the early 2000s rules that were cooked during Doohan's reign. Every one of these legends left a crack in the sport, a crack that had to be filled by new laws. And that brings us to the man who didn't just break the sport, he rebranded it. Valentino Rossi. Rossi arrived in the 500cc class in 2000. By 2001, he was world champion, but his real impact didn't start on the track. It started on the podium. He brought fireworks, literal fireworks, chicken suits, policeman costumes, inflatable dolls. The man made Parc Fermé a stage, and he was the headline act. Fans worshipped him. Sponsors begged for him. But the FIM? They weren't laughing. His celebrations grew bolder, more theatrical, and more unpredictable. MotoGP responded by codifying podium behavior, establishing new post-race media guidelines, and restricting unauthorized props in closed zones. But it didn't matter. Because Rossi wasn't done winning, he was just getting started. He began exploiting flag-to-flag rules before anyone even understood the strategy. In wet-dry races, he'd pit at the exact moment track grip shifted often a full lap earlier than others, and build leads that left his rivals stunned. MotoGP changed rules again. New restrictions were imposed on when bike swaps could happen. Rain flag triggers were revised. Minimum dry laps were set. Why? Because Rossi turned strategic improvisation into art, and the rulebook simply wasn't built for artists. And then there were his rivals. Biaggi, Gibernau, Stoner, Lorenzo. Rossi didn't just beat them, he destroyed their confidence. He'd wave at them mid-corner, psych them out on Saturday, mock them on Sunday. Sete Gibernau? After their infamous Jerez clash in 2005, the man never won another race. Ever. And the last corner dive that sparked that war? It led to post-race review protocols for final lap moves. That's how far Rossi's shadow reached, from the corner exit to the courtrooms. But here's what makes Rossi different from all those legends who came before. He didn't just force rules. He forced a narrative shift. He turned MotoGP from a niche motorsport into a global soap opera. Every press conference, drama, every celebration, a story, and every win, a message. MotoGP had to regulate him just to stop the sport from becoming all about him. From 1960s dynasties to Rossi's psychological theater, MotoGP learned the hard way. When genius strikes, rules must follow. Valentino Rossi didn't just build the empire, he set the rules on fire. And once those flames died down, something even more volatile rose from the ashes. A rider who didn't need charm or drama or podium antics. He brought carnage, leaned into danger, laughed in the face of physics. Marc Marquez, 2013. He wasn't even supposed to contend, just a rookie. But the moment moment he touched that Honda RC213V, something shifted. By round 2, people weren't asking if he could win races. They were asking how long before MotoGP had to change again. What Rossi did with psychology, Marc did with pure violation of natural law. You saw it. Everyone saw it. Bikes weren't meant to do that. Not lean 68 degrees and still grip. Not tuck the front and still stand up. Not low side at 150 kph, then recover mid-slide using your elbow like a second knee. His riding style wasn't developed. It was discovered. Every weekend, onboard replays went viral. Commentators ran out of adjectives. Technicians started rewriting simulation models because telemetry didn't match any known cornering technique. But when physics got nervous, MotoGP got anxious. They introduced tire pressure minimums and mandatory temperature monitoring. Not for safety, but because Marquez was pushing Michelin's thresholds into untested territory. And when the paddock realized his front-end feel allowed him to flirt with low-pressure zones others couldn't risk, regulation clamps came down hard. And that wasn't all. Remember the infamous Argentina 2018? Race start. His bike stalls. He pushes it backwards against grid direction, fires it up, re-enters formation. Then, like a man possessed, he carves through the field like a serial killer with a stopwatch. Hits Alex Espargaro, penalty. Clashes with Valentino, more penalties. But at that point, the system couldn't even keep up with the infractions. MotoGP's penalty structure had been built for racers, not for tornadoes. So in the aftermath, Race Direction rewrote the jumpstart enforcement, added stricter rejoin conditions, and enforced new ride-through clauses for anyone who ignored the marshal's directive. No names were listed in the rule changes, but everyone in the paddock whispered the same one: Marc. By 2019, Marquez had turned MotoGP into his personal video game. 12 wins, 6 second-place finishes, 1 crash, 420 points. That record still stands. He didn't just win, he deleted suspense, and that made MotoGP uncomfortable. Because dominance this clinical threatens the core entertainment model, so they worked quietly. Adjustments to electronic intervention, lean angle telemetry capping, traction control baselining, not to hurt him, but to make sure there would never be another Marquez. But chaos doesn't always arrive through perfection. Sometimes it shows up with a grenade in its pocket. Andrea Iannone. If Marquez was a monster on a leash, Iannone was a missile with no guidance system. They called him the Maniac for a reason. He rode like the checkered flag was optional. His overtakes, apocalyptic. His crashes, routine. His racing line, wherever you weren't. 2016. Argentina. Final lap. Ducati is about to lock down a rare double podium. Dovizioso in second, Iannone in third. Then out of nowhere, he brakes late, loses the front, and T-bones his own teammate in the final corner. Both out. Podium gone. The reaction was nuclear. MotoGP didn't waste time. They introduced irresponsible riding clauses, complete with license points, long lap penalties, and carryover warnings that haunted riders for months. Iannone didn't need to break rules. He forced them into existence. And while the Maniac was rewriting punishment policy, another rider was manipulating the sport through timing, not aggression. Jorge Lorenzo. He was the eye of the storm. Not flashy, not erratic, just perfect. When Jorge got pole, you knew what was coming. Hole shot, turn 1 lead, lap after lap of digital precision. He'd lay down 25 laps like he was copy-pasting telemetry. Corner entry, throttle release, gear shifts, all robotic. That might sound boring, but it was deadly. Because in a sport built on unpredictability, Lorenzo removed suspense. You weren't watching a race, you were watching a disappearance. MotoGP saw the writing on the wall, so they shook things up. Introduced asymmetric tire compounds, tighter fuel allocations, new grid penalty protocols that punished overly clean tactics. Why? Because when races start looking like spreadsheets, fans stop caring. Lorenzo didn't just beat riders, he beat the chaos that MotoGP was selling. And while all this was happening, another quiet storm was brewing, one from the shadows of 2007. Casey Stoner, a man so allergic to nonsense, he let his riding do all the screaming. His title with Ducati, still the most savage performance MotoGP's ever seen. That red beast was unrideable. Raw, violent, dangerous. But Stoner didn't care. He rode it like he was on rails and everyone else looked like amateurs. That bike's power delivery? Nasty. Its handling? Hostile. And Stoner made it look like a scooter. Teams couldn't believe it. So they cried foul. Ducati's electronics are too advanced. MotoGP responded by initiating the ECU standardization project, which would later evolve into the Spec ECU era, a rule that erased Stoner's edge after he'd already left a mark too deep to forget. And then, as if the grid wasn't already boiling over, Maverick Vinales added a new kind of rule to the chaos. Emergency survival protocols. Austria, 2021. Brake failure. 200 plus kph. No runoff. No room. No margin. He jumps off the bike. Full commit. Flies into the air like a ragdoll. No crash. No contact. Just instinct. MotoGP realized the scary truth. Their safety systems weren't ready for riders improvising at those speeds. So they mandated new override ECU functions, improved kill switch mappings, and introduced compulsory education for emergency maneuvers. One man's leap reshaped how the sport handles its worst-case scenario. By the end of the 2010s, the sport was on edge. Riders were too smart, too technical, too explosive. So what did MotoGP do? They added rules, then added rules on top of those rules, then buried the old versions. Because they weren't regulating bikes anymore, they were regulating evolution. And yet, the next wave hadn't even arrived. By the time the dust settled on Marquez's dominance, Iannone's recklessness, and Stoner's alien control, MotoGP was no longer just reacting to riders, it was bracing for them. Every rule in the book had a name behind it. Every paragraph was a scar from a previous battle. But the next generation didn't just aim to bend rules. They wanted to automate victory. Enter the Ducati revolution. What began as clever engineering quickly morphed into a full-blown technological assault on the championship. Ducati wasn't trying to copy Honda or Yamaha anymore. They were crafting machines for aerodynamic warfare. In just 4 seasons, they brought in front hole shot systems, rear ride height mechanisms, winglets the size of fighter jet flaps, and swing arm mounted tire coolers that confused even the paddock veterans. Each part legal when introduced wasn't just innovative, it was game-breaking. Other manufacturers scrambled, the regulations unprepared. And while officials debated, Ducati's lead rider Francesco Bagnaia rode into the storm like a man who already knew the outcome. In 2022, Pecco wasn't flashy. He didn't need drama. He had a motorcycle that could launch like a catapult, hold braking zones with scalpel precision, and exit corners like it had glue on the tires. He turned race starts into checkmate moves. By the first sector, it was often already done. MotoGP panicked because what Bagnaia and Ducati were doing wasn't cheating. It was unfair efficiency. So they responded. First, rear ride height devices were axed. Then, aero updates were frozen to a single homologation per season. Later, aero bodywork got capped by dimensional boxes. No more mid-season reshaping. No more innovation races. Why? Because Bagnaia exposed something terrifying. If you gave one rider the right tech toolbox, you didn't need suspense. You just needed clean air. And clean air kills viewership. But Ducati wasn't the only concern. Fabio Quartararo in 2021 rode a Yamaha that shouldn't have won the title. It was down on power, struggled in straights, had no hole shot system early in the season. But Fabio, he turned corners into canvas and he painted masterpieces. His entry speed, tire preservation, and throttle modulation created a paradox. He won on a slower bike, repeatedly. That should have been a fairy tale. Instead, it triggered a storm because his success uncovered flaws in the tire allocation system. Michelin's compounds were too sensitive. Some batches favored certain chassis over others. Quartararo's riding style depended on pinpoint grip, so when tire performance shifted even slightly, his whole race collapsed. The protests rolled in. Manufacturers claimed inconsistency. We want to listen. The result? Refined tire batch controls, improved compound testing, new track temperature thresholds for allocation approval. Fabio didn't complain, but his championship forced Michelin to recalibrate their entire approach. Then came the silent uprising, Aprilia. Under Alex Espargaro, Aprilia clawed its way from irrelevance to podium contention. They were still enjoying development concessions, extra testing, engines, wildcards. But once they started winning, rivals cried foul. MotoGP changed course again. Concessions would now expire the moment a manufacturer reached competitive thresholds. No carryover, no transitional period. April triggered it. The paddock understood why. No more underdogs with advantages. Once you bite the elite, you're one of them. No more favors. And then there's the war that nobody can win. Aerodynamics. Once Ducati opened Pandora's box, everyone followed. Winglets turned into full-body airflow solutions. Downforce went up. Cornering speeds climbed. Overtakes dropped. Slipstreaming, once the lifeblood of straight battles, died. MotoGP faced a crisis. Too much tech, too little action. The fix? Standardized aerodynamic regulations. Dimensional limits. Fixed homologation windows. And one ugly truth. Aero killed chaos, so they capped it. But as the bikes got smarter, the sport started worrying about something even more dangerous than machinery. Mindset. MotoGP's greatest fear wasn't speed. It was what riders were willing to sacrifice to find it. Marquez tried to ride 2 days after surgery. Rossi once raced with broken bones. Lorenzo returned to the saddle with a fractured vertebra. Heroism? Sure, but it was sending the wrong message. So MotoGP responded. Medical clearance policies became stricter. Riders now face mandatory assessments. Neurological, cardiovascular, musculoskeletal before return. Minimum recovery periods were introduced. Clearance isn't just a doctor's note. It's data, scans, and committee decisions. Because what Marquez did in 2020 nearly broke the system. And the sport realized it could no longer incentivize self-destruction. They also raised the minimum rider age to 18 across all categories. Why? Because teenage prodigies were pushing themselves to death in Moto3 and feeder series. One season saw 3 fatalities under age 16. It wasn't sustainable. So they banned potential before it had the chance to go too far. And that's the irony. The very traits that made legends, insanity, pain tolerance, unpredictability, were now disqualifiers. MotoGP was quietly transforming into a managed theater. Still fast, still thrilling, but with invisible fences to keep the monsters contained. You can't showboat like Rossi. You can't elbow drag like Marc. You can't start tire wars like Casey. You can't kill suspense like Lorenzo. You can't out-strategize like Pecco. And you can't go off-script like Iannone. Because every one of those riders didn't just win titles, they broke the format. And now, MotoGP isn't just defending its sport, it's defending its identity. The message is clear: if you invent a new way to dominate, they will applaud you, then stop you. Because in MotoGP, being the best doesn't just get you trophies, it gets you erased from possibility. you'll win. Then the doors you kick open, they'll be locked forever. MotoGP isn't just a championship, it's a war between brilliance and balance. And every time someone rises above the system, riding faster, smarter, or riskier than anyone thought possible, the rulebook doesn't reward them. It retaliates, because this sport doesn't protect the rider who changes the game. It protects the game from being changed again. So when history asks, why did the rules shift? Why did that loophole close? Why did no one ever do that again? The answer is always the same, because someone once did too well.